Peacock Angel by E.S. Drower, being some account of votaries of a secret cult and their sanctuaries. We continue with chapter 15, Pilgrims' Progress. Come and, with kindly gifts, return homeward again. Theocritus, Adele 22. We previously were talking about the Yazidi New Year. In 2024, Red Wednesday is April 3rd, and of course the sunset before that. In 2025, Red Wednesday is April 2nd, and of course the sunset before that. In 2026, Red Wednesday is April 1st, and of course the sunset before that. In 2027, Red Wednesday is April 7th, and of course the Tuesday night before that. And in 2028, Red Wednesday is April 5th, and the Red Wednesday before that. And some ways that we can tell the Yazidi apart is the use of red or white yarn as a charm, a basambar, a toque or gurvan, which is a white undershirt with a round necktie, and in that way it distinguishes itself from the Zoroastrian and Hindu ritual undergarment. The orange kashtik is a fanny pack, and a kuin, it means blood, and there's some features that a person would notice. The particularly long mustaches, and there's some language and ceremonial differences that will be noticed. The first stage of our journey was a short one. We halted at Bahsani, where the Mir, Saad Beg, accompanied by Qawwals and the sacred peacock, were staying for the day. The sacred peacock, the Sanjak, is an image in bronze, the symbol of the peacock angel. There are several of these images, each of which is taken round by the Qawwals at certain seasons of the year and exhibited to the faithful, who bring offerings in money or kind. These offerings are given to the Mir and represent a considerable yearly revenue, now diminished owing to difficulties and restrictions brought about by war conditions and other things. The Qawwals cannot cross the frontiers into other countries. The Sanjak is a standard, and it's to be shown in secret. It's not paraded about in the open like some of the statues and stuff of other cults. Years ago, knowing that at least one such image is kept in Ba-Idri, where the Mir lives, I asked, while paying him a visit at his castle, whether I might be permitted to see the sacred bird, and E.S. Drower was told that it was not here. Now, April 4th's sunset is here, and Red Wednesday has come. First fruits is adorned with the sun. Blessed with the concealment, the red and yellow Wednesday has come. The spring is adorned with green, red, white, and yellow. And we have decorated our door lintels with them. And we saw in one of the previous programs this order. We also find the blue, black, white, and yellow sequence of the beads as something that, has them stand apart. According to various accounts, the image varies in shape from the crude representation of something which looks like a dove or fowl to the conventionalized bird with a puntile, actually to be seen in the South Kensington Museum. How this was obtained, I do not know. There was supposed to be several that went around. It's generally agreed that there were 7 of them. It doesn't somewhere say that it could have been 9. The reason why the peacock was chosen as the earthly symbol for the Prince of Angels has been discussed many times by pundits, and M. Lescott, in his book recently published about the Yazidis in the Jebel Sinjar, has summed up a somewhat negative result of their deliberations. Now, it's thought that the present images that have survived are from the 1300s, 1400s revival, or maybe the 1100s codification period, but they're not thought to be the more ancient ones. Here I was, within a stone throws of a sacred peacock, and yet I decided not to appear conscious of its presence. A cabal led us up a narrow street and took us into the crowded courtyard of one of the larger houses of the village. Chickens scratched about the feet of the men standing in the courtyard, some of which, no doubt, were awaiting their turn to visit the sacred bird. The peacock was in a room off the courtyard. I saw arrivals conducted to the door by a cabal. Upon the Iwan, our open dais room, set the mirror, and on benches spread with carpets round the 3 walls were a number of visitors, 2 of whom got up to give place to myself and Jadon. Amongst these, 1 or 2 wore European coats and the Arake Sidara, tokens of the townsman and official, and opposite to the mirror sat the local Jacobite priest in his black robes. The Baba Sheikh and his son were also present, so that both spiritual and temporal lords of the Yazidis were met under one roof. Sa'id Beg, prince of the Yazidis, Wansa's husband, is a tall and not ill-favored man of under 40 who wears his very long black beard curled into lovelock. He gave me a courteous reception, telling me that I had been awaited for some time at Sheikh Ade. I explained the reason of my delay and thanked him for his offer of hospitality there, where he had most kindly placed a guest room there at my disposal. He said that he had given orders that I was to be shown all that was to be seen there. My heart leapt joyfully at this, and that all should be done to make my stay comfortable. And again, I thanked him for his hospitality and forethought. Conversation lapsed into polite banalities and was punctuated by questions about our stay at Bashika by the priest who sat beside me. The coffee, ordained by laws of politeness, was brought and swallowed, and then, as the morning was ready wearing on, I asked permission to take my leave. The Mir wished to send 2 men with me as an escort, but as there was no room for them in the Ford, a compromise was arrived at. A Taktir sent his son, a handsome lad with clear brown eyes, called Hadja, who contrived to squeeze himself in between Jadon and Mikhail at the back amongst the luggage, while I surrounded myself with smaller objects in the seat by the driver, Aziz. The road follows the foothills, and tall yellow flowers stood like candelabra above the young corn. Is it corn or is it grain? Some of the fields were brown and unsown, left fallow till another year. Storks were searching amongst the furrows. In the cornfields, I saw plenty of the gay flower called getik, which has a flax-like leaf and a pink flower, not unlike campion. After passing the mounds of Tepe Gaura and Khorsabad, names familiar from objects in museum cases, we came to the village of Batilia, set in olive groves to the right of the track. Here a horse and donkey yoked together were plowing the rich brown soil, the plow being, of course, the simple Virgilian plowshare, which can be shouldered at the day's end by the plowman and carried home. We continued to follow the line of the foothills, just below them being a flaming yellow carpet of flowers, perhaps hawkweed. The next village was Nowera, set on low hills to the left, a heap of mud houses with flat roofs, rising one above the other like steps and topped by a large, prosperous-looking white house at the summit of the mound. It was just here that the road from Bashika met that from Mosul to Sha'akan or Ain Sifne. The town has two names. Cultivation stopped at this point, and the ground on either side of the road was brilliant with wild flowers. It climbed upwards, and at the top of the ridge we beheld blue hills, and behind these a mountain range tipped with snow. The road now switchbacked up and down, and at each rise the hills were closer. Always there were flowers, hawkweed, ranunculus, grape hyacinth, and a handsome lavender-colored bindweed, the folk name of which is Lithloth. The telegraph poles marched with us, for Ain Sitne is linked now with the outer world, and on the wires the bee-eaters perched are swooped in flocks overhead, uttering high, gossiping, chirping calls. These jewel-like birds, all emerald and flame, arrive later than the storks and swallows. In these parts, the bee-eater is called Tir Yula, the flower bird, because it comes with the flowers. We passed a village on the right, set on a hill, all ceiling wax red with ranunculus. I noted many wild flowers here, and saw again that beautiful yellow flower like a rock rose, the fragrance of which had delighted us in Bashika. Amongst old friends were the lovely hyacinth blue gladiolus and the white clusters of the Star of Bethlehem, while the iris flourished everywhere. We were mounting higher, and presently, above a stretch of narcissus, now withered, we saw the road winding away to Ba-Idra, claiming the foothills on our left, and near it, but still farther off, would be Al-Kosh, where the prophet Nahum is buried, and the monastery of Rabban Hormuzd is cut into the rocky face of the mountain. A man of Tel Kaif told me that in the days before the church on that precipitous rock was rebuilt, it was whitewashed by the monks with lime and milk, and, said he, the shining light of it was like a diamond. It could be seen as far as Mosul. The car was now approaching Ain Sitne, also set on a hill, and above it like a beacon stood the tall white cone of a Yazidi mazar. The townlet contains a mixed population of Muslimin, Christians, and Yazidis. Below the houses were groves of trees, grassy slopes, and masses of buttercups. Up the steep slope we rattled. Workmen were busy on the road, which they were transforming into a tarmac highway, so as to link Ain Sifne permanently with Mosul, for at present it is often isolated for weeks during the winter rains. We drew up before the Sara'a, the government offices. Here my instructions were to ask for one Sa'adat Effendi and to call upon the Qa'im Maqam. I found the latter dignitary sitting in a state and coolness in the shade of a great mulberry tree, smoking and conversing with friends. He had been informed of my coming and received me with dignity, introducing me to several local functionaries, including the schoolmaster, whose intelligent face and charming manners augured well for Ain Sifne. When I asked if the pack animals ordered for me had arrived, it seemed that the matter, which was not pressing, could be settled later. We drank coffee under the mulberry tree while I sought news about the war, for the Qa'im has a radio. In fact, the place, compared to Bashika, was a very metropolis. After coffee, no hurry, no hurry, you had plenty of time. Tea was brought in glasses, and then the schoolmaster, whose two children, a son, Wissam, and a shy little daughter, peeped at me from the protection of their father's knee or arm, took me to the small schoolhouse. Here he and two assistants teach the youth of Ain Sifneh, the 3 R's, and the classes, though not yet the classrooms, constantly grow bigger. The Yazidis, he said, here as at Bashika, were at first averse to sending their boys to school, for the tree of knowledge bears forbidden fruit. Only the sheikhs may read and write. But this prejudice is weakening, and the number of Yazidi pupils increases. Well, the problem is the type of knowledge that they're giving, or the type of programming. It's like there's a lot of philosophy of science labeled as science. We got and so-called anti-ethics or different ethics presented as if it's like scientifically backed up. We got back to the mulberry tree, and I asked if the mules had arrived. The inspector and Imqam replied that unfortunately they were out in the fields working. Had they not had word from Mosul of my coming that day? Yes, indeed, but nothing so very definite. However, they said, why do you not go on by car? Everyone goes there by car. Now, years before, I had twice been to Sheikh Ada by car without luggage in dry weather, and each time I had marveled at the arrival of the car more or less intact. The road is unsuitable for cars, even in a country where cars, especially Fords, will set out gaily over roads which can, joyously, over roads which can only be so called by a robust effort of imagination. I replied that Aziz, our driver, who knew that the road from Ain Sifneh was evil, had only consented to take us this far on the express condition that he went no further. The said Aziz, having newly paid or borrowed to pay £60 for his second-hand Ford, and cherishing it like his paternal uncle's daughter, perhaps. Well, I guess you have to get at least that far. The cousins, it at least has to be first cousins before you can get married, right? And genetically, there's really nothing wrong with it if one does it, if it's done every so often, or it's not done knowing any genetic issues involved. Perhaps they said, hopefully another car will turn up. It did not seem likely. Moreover, I wondered if, even now, pack animals might be procured. They played another card. We will speak to your driver, they said. Aziz was summoned, and he stated that he knew the road was very bad, and that he would not take his car over it. But it is not so bad, they reasoned with him mildly. It has been improved, much improved. Work has been done on it, and indeed cars go thither very often. To prove their words, a Yazidi car driver was produced. He introduced himself as a driver of cars, and also as owner of the pack animals, which had not appeared. He added his persuasions to those of authority. Smiling and confident, he assured that doubting Thomas, Aziz, that the road was perfect. One or at most 2 difficult places there might be, but it was easy to get a car over or around them, and he himself had often driven to Sheikh Adam. Unwillingly, gloomily, Aziz allowed himself to be persuaded. I will accompany you and show you, said the Yazidi driver. And when we said there was not a spare centimeter in a car which already contained 5 people with their bedding and household gear, he said cheerfully that that was nothing. He could hold on outside. So amidst sighs of relief from authority, we set off down the track. Not so bad, we said to ourselves hopefully, for the first half mile was certainly not much worse than the track which leads from Bashika. but it soon deteriorated. In fact, it became indescribably bad. We got out and walked, whilst we heard the car laboring, grinding, bumping, appearing at nightmare angles as it negotiated rocks, or landing with a bump or scrape from a crag. I decided as I walked that, firstly, were a society founded for the prevention of cruelty to cars, I would join it, and secondly, that I would greatly increase the price for which Aziz had consented reluctantly to bear us farther. It was a pilgrim's progress indeed for Aziz, with slows of despond and battalions of boulders, and we enjoyed walking. We approached nearer and nearer to the mountains. Occasionally, when the road became unexpectedly better, we mounted again, but regretted it as Aziz, in his bitterness, set his teeth and drove recklessly at bumps and furrows, muttering curses while we held on and murmured, "We will walk, Aziz, let us walk," or more urgently, "Yawash, Yawash," softly, softly. Just as John Gilpin sought his steed, but Aziz's blood was up, and he took no notice. If my car is smashed, he seemed to imply, you shall be in it. We came to streams, which we crossed by stepping stones, whilst the car labored through. The valley became increasingly beautiful. Wildflowers we now took for granted, but as well bushes were in blossom, and the oaks on the hillsides were in tender new leaf. On the floor of the valley were paddy fields, flooded for rice. Beside one stream which we forded, a shepherd, wearing a small round felt cap, sat taking his ease beneath an oak tree, a double reed pipe in his hand. The way now followed this stream, and the valley narrowed. Oleanders, not yet in blossom, grew there in profusion. Now, anybody using oleanders medicinally, don't just know what you're doing. Don't just, you read online, oh, it's good for this or that. And that's one you got to be careful for. So, just don't take plant medicine, take plant medicine, Then the road crossed the stream once more, and our faces were turned up mountain. It was just after this the car stopped, bogged in a patch of mud. We had just passed the little hamlet of Lalish, and from this point it is barely a quarter of a mile's walk to the shrine. And in any case, the car could have gone a little farther. So I left them to unload, then set off alone, to Don promising to secure people from Lalish to bring up our gear. It was delightful to walk up that shaded pilgrim's way to Sheikh Ada. The path follows the stream, which rushes noisily down over its stony bed. On either side rise mountains, rocky and overgrown with trees. Halfway up, I seated myself on a boulder to listen to the water, breathe in the perfume of the herbs and wet earth, and revel in the greenness and swaying shadows of the lovely place. There was a sound, and a Kurdish woman and her daughter appeared, who picked their way over the stepping stones to rejoin the path to the hamlet below, gazing at me with smiles of surprise and answering my greeting in Kurdish. On their shoulders, they bore large embroidered pokes filled with loaves of bread. And one of the things that we see about Lalish is the place where Shaitan, meaning cast out of a place, when him and his angels, the jinn, when they came to Earth, they were supposed to come to Earth there, and that's where they cleaned their weapons. The story goes. I got up and went on and upwards, the sound of rushing waters growing ever louder, and the green foliage and fresh spring leafage denser. Many are the trees in the Holy Valley. Figs grow there freely beside the sturdy little oaks, spreading mulberries and kingly terebinth trees. Oswan, which produce jade-colored berries and are so sacred that their wood must not be burnt. The tree yields a resin and a fruit. Its leaves are used as fodder for stock and for tanning and dyeing. Suddenly, at a twist in the path, I turned a corner and came face to face with the last apparition I had expected. Two Iraqi policemen who greeted me with equal astonishment. "We heard that you were coming, but we expected you days ago," said one of them. I was not pleased when I thought that they might have been sent on my account, but it turned out that their presence had nothing to do with mine. Murder had recently been done in the valley on a large scale, and a small post of police had been established at Lalish and at the shrine for the keeping of peace. Well, not large scale like America, I'm sure, but enough to keep police on the watch, right? The man who had spoken to me was a lean little man with a brown face. He told me that, being of mountain blood, he had begged to be sent to mountains. Not necessarily his mountains, but any mountains. His superiors were suspicious, but finally offered him a post here with the loss of a stripe and diminution of pay. He accepted gladly, and he told me, gained by it, for a Khatun in a town, all one's money goes quickly on food and clothes and cigarettes. Here I live almost for nothing and have no needs and save money. The mountains are my home, and better than coffee houses and cinemas and club alog commotion. I never wish to see the city again. The second policeman, his superior officer, was a genial soul, and although himself a Muslim, his tact and gentleness and kindliness have won the respect and affection from the Yazidis who lived at the shrine. And see, that's the thing. If they actually act like a Muslim around the world, people wouldn't mind there being Islamic government. But they get all westernized and try to do the Western version of jihad rather than the Arabic one. I try to force religion and for outside the place of worship. Talking together, we walked on and came suddenly upon an archway of gray stone, and standing beneath it, two of the white-clad, nun-like attendants of the shrine. The elder was a woman of late middle age, with an expression of singular sweetness and dignity, whose name I learned later was Dea Koteh. A widow of good family, she had renounced the world and come here, becoming the abbess or cabana of this small community of white ladies. The other, a girl, was a novice vowed to spend her life unmarried in the service of the holy place. Over their white robes, they wore a mazar of white homespun wool, and a wimple was wound over their spotless white turbans and brought over the lower part of the face, sometimes covering the mouth. They walked barefoot, as do all Yazidis when in sacred precincts. When later, I sat with them in the forecourt of the temple of Sheikh Ada, I saw the third of the white trio sitting on the wall by their private apartments. I faintly remembered having seen her on a previous visit to Sheikh Ada some 17 years before. Now she was an old woman, and her face wrinkled and seamed. Her aquiline nose that curved to meet her chin showed in profile as she sat on the gray wall, her back bent and twirling unceasingly her spindle as her old fingers detached. Threads of the white cotton wound round her left arm. She is spinning wicks, they said, for spinning wicks for the temple lights is one of the occupations of the holy women. To me, as she sat there, old and absorbed, she looked like Clotho, spinning the threads of human destiny. Not once did she glance below. though she must have heard our voices unless she had become deaf, nor, during all my stay, did she once approach me or speak. Once I came face to face with her, but she turned back immediately. The fine old face was empty and the old eyes unseeing. They told me that in her age she has become silent and lost of spirit, and does nothing the day long but ply her spindle. I have gone sadly ahead of events. I was taken by these white ladies and the police by winding ways, under archways, and across ancient paved courtyards, across which mountain water rushed in paved beds, and past the temple of Sheikh Ada itself, where the famous black snake is carved on the long stone by the doorway, down steps and under more archways, until we arrived at the courtyard where on my first visit I had been entertained by guardians of the shrine. Now, it's believed, in at least by some, that before the Peacock incarnation, which, it's year 6773, I believe, as I record this. A big black snake was before that. Also talk about a dog, a big black dog, again, like white dots or white dot. It lies to the south of the temple, and off it are the living rooms of Fakir Reshu, the Knas sweeper, or servitor of the shrine. He came forward to meet me, and cushions were laid on a stone platform beneath a pergola of boughs. A pergola of boughs, so that I might rest in its shade while tea was prepared, sweetened tea in small, wasted glasses, fresh made over an open fire of mountain wood. I generally like to make infusions first, so I get all the nutrients and then get my tea later. His family lived here with him, for unlike the white ladies and the Shawish fakirs, in spite of their ascetic life, may marry. The Khanas, or Hirash, as he is sometimes called, acts as servitor of the shrine for 1 year only, and pays for the privilege, which is accorded to the highest bidder. Fakir Reshu had paid the mere 350 dinars, 550 pounds, or is that 550 lira? Yeah, I think it's lira. For his year's tendency. In normal years, he might have hoped to make this and far more out of the offerings of pilgrims who visit the shrine, especially at the great feast of assembly in the autumn, where thousands travel to the valley and camp out on the hillsides and in the stone huts dotted over the sides of the valley. Pilgrims give not only money but jewels, gold and silver ornaments, so that the custodian usually leaves the valley a richer man than he went in. But prospects this year of ore were gloomy. His duties are to receive the pilgrims and their fees, to show them the shrines, and particularly the temple and tomb of Sheikh Ada, to keep the holy places swept and clean, and at every sunset to kindle the sacred lamps and lights. This is by no means a light task. Every evening he uses 2 mans of olive oil in his pilgrimage of illumination. That is to say, 13 large hukkahs, he told me. A man, a man meant nothing to me, and a hukkah is the vaguest of measures. So I asked Fakir Reshu if he could give me an idea of what a man was. A petrol tin, he answered. Contains about a man and a half. Fakir Reshu, the servitor of the year, was a small, lean, sallow little man, in type very different from the fair, healthy, open-faced villagers of Bashika. He looked darker, meaner, his pinched face was pale, and pockmarked. His eyes were dark and opaque, and he rarely smiled. He was a native of Ba-Idra, where the Mir lives, but his wife, buxom, good-tempered girl, who had borne him a boy, was now suckling a baby daughter, came from Bahsana. They shared the couple of rooms with another woman, wife of his brother, a fakir whom I had seen in Bahsana. Now touring with the Qawwals and Secret Peacock, this woman was stepmother to Hajja, the Yazidi lad who had accompanied us from Bahsana. She too had a baby girl. The pair of families ate, cooked, and sat in the paved court before their rooms, washing their dishes in a stream which courses down a paved channel near their shrine. I had hoped much for the letter with which Rashid had given me to the Shawish, the permanent guardian of the shrine, for he, Rashid told me, spoke Arabic as well as Kurdish, and I was disappointed to find that he, too, was absent. During the villages, it was said that he was a man of knowledge, not only of the faith, but also of the world, and I had hoped to learn much from him. As soon as I saw Dr. Reshu, whose Arabic was halting, I realized that here I should find it difficult to strike a responsive spark, and it did not take me long to find out that he was jealously fanatical by temperament. He was, however, scrupulous about his duties as host, and the scrappy lunch we had swallowed as we went from Ain Sifne was supplemented later by a meal they offered us in their quarters. It consisted of chicken and rice, washed down by shanina and scooped into our mouths by pieces of thin Kurdish bread. The guest room to which I was conducted by the factor was a light structure built above a stone chamber a few yards from the baptism tank and a swift stream which moved over a paved channel. To reach my eyrie, which was surrounded entirely by windows, I was glad of Captain C's curtains. One ascended steps from the paved way which leads uphill by the baptism cisterns and came into the large stone court where arches on either side shelter peddlers and their wares at the time of the autumn feast. Then more steps led to an earthen platform shaded by an enormous and very ancient tree, and from this more steps ascended to a small new terrace and the guest room. This was shaded by a big mulberry tree. The guest room was the least seemly thing in the whole warren of buildings and courts, for it had an iron roof and looked the afterthought that it was. Inside, the rain had stained the walls a little, but there were benches on which one could sit or sleep, plenty of pegs for clothes, and a somewhat dilapidated cupboard with shelves and a glass front, of which only a pane or so remained. It was an excellent and unexpectedly comfortable shelter for the traveler, and the palace compared to the ordinary Kurdish dwelling room, shared with domestic animals. To have so many windows was delightful. On one side I had rocks and trees, and a rocky path leading to some upper sanctuaries, and from the other windows a view over the complex of ancient courtyards, archways, and rushing water, while my few curtains sufficed to screen one side of the room from the men who sat all day on the platform below. Here they played chess on a board traced on the ground with a pointed stick, acorns, peas, and stones for chessmen. Here the police, with Jadon and Mikhail, ate the food, sent them daily from the fakir's house. And here after sunset, they brought large oak boughs and kindled a leaping fire around which they sat and talked till sleep overtook them. Then they lay down on rugs and quilts and slept round the fire. From one unscreened window, I could see the fakir every evening going his rounds with the sacred fire, and watched little flames leap up as he placed burning wicks here and there on his way. He bore a large bowl of the oil in his left hand. To this bowl, a wide lip had been soldered, and laid on this lip, their ends hanging down in the oil, were a bunch of burning wicks just before dusk, and light went early because the westerly sun was soon hidden behind the mountains. He set off barefoot on his rounds, carrying his bowl and ladle. Here and there, on jutting corners of masonry or of rock, he laid a wick to burn itself out, and wherever a lamp stood in a niche, poured in oil and set a fresh wick alight in its lip. I'd shake at it, except in the temple, where square lamps similar to those I had seen at Sheikh Mohammed were used. Lamps were of the ancient classical shape and made of iron. As the servitor approached with his lights, all stood up and did not resume their seats till he had disappeared up a passageway or under an arch, to reappear later higher up, either amongst the buildings or rocks. Again, I run ahead of my narrative. My first task, when my new abode had been swept out, was to dispose of the baggage and set up the camp bed. These had arrived by way of the steep path from Lullish on the backs of villagers, headed by the chauffeur driver himself, who had the grace to be a little ashamed of having told Aziz that the road was so good. Aziz himself appeared later on, having pulled his car out of the mud with help of the villagers. He was both surprised and pleased when I paid him a quarter of a dinar more than the agreed price, and we said goodbye on excellent terms, he promising to tell the authorities in Ain Sifne that for the return journey I preferred pack animals and would not require a car until I reached Ain Sifne. A table had been provided in the guest chamber, and on this I set my wash basin. But the fakir looked troubled when he saw our two hurricane petroleum lanterns. These cannot be used here, he said, for we may only burn olive oil. He indicated two tiny lamps, like the dim red lights which burn before altars in Christian churches. They contained a spoonful or so of olive oil and a single wick. Mikhail and I looked at each other with some consternation. May wax candles be used? I asked humbly. I did not mention that the wax was petroleum wax. After some thought, the fakir gave permission. We wondered if he would ban primus, which we used as cooking stove, for that certainly would not flourish on an olive oil diet. However, it was never brought into question. Mikhail erected the primus into the stone chamber below, and the fakir turned a discreetly blind eye in its direction. There was one other inconvenience. Sanitary arrangements were non-existent, for none may pollute the holy valley. For necessities of nature, the pilgrim must climb out to the hospitality of the mountain. Nevertheless, I noticed huts used for stabling in the precincts for mules and horses, and that no objection was offered if a beast staled or vented droppings. Cats, too, roamed about the place, as soft-footed as the nuns, but dogs were chased off as soon as they appeared. Sometimes they managed to slink up from the village below in search of food. Well, beeswax and stuff like this, and plant oils, if that's the rule. But yeah, For some people, the so-called authorities will turn the other eye, but it shouldn't per se be the authorities. If it's the religious rule of the place, it's the religious rule of the place.